Okay, welcome. Last week we were in Sardis, actually for 2 weeks. A wonderful, very lovely visual city with a lot of history. This week we are going to Colosse, a small city, and Laodicea, another very large and very visual place. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Let me pull those slides up for you, and we'll be off to Colosse and Laodicea. Okay. So, during Paul's first missionary journey, he and Barnabas were all over this area, South Central Asia Minor. And then in the second missionary journey, he spent quite a bit of time at Philippi, Thessalonica, and Corinth. And we were there several weeks ago. What we call his third missionary journey, spent a great deal of time in Ephesus. And while he was in Ephesus, some folks from this area inland, from Colosse and Hierapolis and Laodicea, had come to visit him in Ephesus. In fact, one of those was a man named Philemon, who was a wealthy landowner from Colosse. He visited Paul in Ephesus, became a follower of Jesus, went back home, and he and his wife started a house church in Colosse. So we're going to visit there later. Also, during the time that Paul was in Ephesus, a young man named Epaphras, also from this area, had come, been one of Paul's students at Ephesus School of Theology, and had gone back and helped churches get started here in Colosse, Laodicea, and Hierapolis. And then later, while Paul is in Rome, we think this was the 60 to 62 AD time, described in Acts chapter 28. While Paul is in Rome, he writes a couple of letters. Writes one to the church at Colosse, and we call it Colossians. He writes one to Philemon, who's a wealthy landowner in Colosse. He writes one to the church at Ephesus. We call it Ephesians. And he writes one to the church in Philippi. We call it Philippians. So, we think that these are, other than Paul's letters to Timothy and Titus, these are toward the end of Paul's life, toward the end of his ministry. So today we're going to visit those churches right there in the Lycus River Valley. There's a little close-up. So this is the Lycus River here. Flows into the Meander. Meander flows out and comes into the Aegean at Miletus. If you remember the book of Acts, chapter 20, at one point Paul wanted to meet with the Ephesian elders, but didn't want to go to Ephesus, so he called them down to Miletus. It's Acts chapter 20. We get that wonderful farewell message from Paul at Miletus, where he says at the end, "Now I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and give you the inheritance among all those who are sanctified." A passage drawn upon by many pastors when they leave a church to go to a new church, justifiably so. Acts chapter 20. Paul's longest speech to a Christian audience. So here's that little Lycus River Valley flowing into the Meander. So we have the relatively small city of Colosse, large city of Laodicea, and the city of Hierapolis right here, just on the other side of the Lycus River. Not sure why this map skipped Hierapolis, but it is, in fact, right there. Okay, we're going to go to Colosse first and then to Laodicea. That is Colosse right there. You're thinking that's just a little hump in the prairie. You're right. I'll get you a little closer. That is the mound of Colosse. You can see it looks a little bit bigger now as we get closer. Never been excavated. One of the few biblical sites that has not been excavated. Hopefully will be soon. That will shed more light on the church at Colosse. We're going to go right there next. And that's how it's spelled, sometimes with the A-E and sometimes just with the E. And you can see the mound gets a little larger as you get closer. And we're going to go up on the mound. There's been, unfortunately, some looting here and there, but mostly unexcavated, just one very large mound waiting to be opened up and studied. On top of the mound, looking toward Mount Cadmus and its younger twin here, and the modern city. So what happened was there was a massive earthquake in this area about 60 AD, and also one in 17, and another one in 400. And finally the people up on the top of the mound just got sick of it, walked away, and started a new town down in the valley. And so that is partly why this is so available to us. But do notice the mountain. And this is a beautiful area. So when Philemon, the landowner, woke up in the morning, this was the view he had. He had extensive vineyards here, and he had flocks of sheep, which were sheared and then dyed into kind of a light purple, purplish pink wool, which was very valuable. The vineyards, of course, were valuable, olive orchards. And one of his servants was a man named Onesimus, who gets special mention in Paul's letter to Philemon. So when I was here, I said to our guide, I said, if you ever start excavating here and need help, let me know. And he said, yes, you and everybody else, whoever comes here, because this is such a beautiful area. But since there's so much under the dirt there, we're going to go to Laodicea, where there's a lot more that's out. So those are those two mountains I mentioned, and ancient Colosse is behind that ridge. And this is Laodicea, where we're going to go next. Behind us is Hierapolis. We'll be there next week. But you can see already that Laodicea was a much larger city in Paul's day and in John's day. So this is the modern road. You can see it really hugs the ground, crosses the river there. Well, so when Epaphras went back and forth from his homeland here in Colosse, Laodicea, to Ephesus to attend Ephesus School of Theology with Paul, this is the river he would have crossed. Although not on the modern road, he would have crossed on the Roman road. And these are the piers for the Roman road. Next slide makes that a little more clear. So modern people said we can, get down close to the water. We don't care if it washes out. The Romans had said, we are going to build a serious bridge. If we're going to build a bridge, it's going to be a serious bridge. And that was their bridge. And Epaphras would have been walking there on his way to Ephesus, which was about 100 miles due west of these three little cities. Okay. Laodicea did not have a good water supply close by, and so their water was brought in from a distance. Clay pipes enclosed in stone blocks for protection, and very heavily encrusted with minerals. The water in this part of the world is heavily mineral laden, still true today. In the hotel, you may wash your hands in the sink, but don't even think about drinking the water. You drink bottled water. And that was kind of a nuisance. These pipes would actually seal shut over the years. But it's also the source of the very, very beautiful travertine terrace at Hierapolis, which we will show you next week. So there's upsides and downsides to having a lot of calcium in your water. Every good Greek theater, every good Greek city had at least one theater. Laodicea had two theaters, and this is one of them, built nicely into the hillside, as you can see. Those earthquakes are hard on theaters, of course. That's why many of these blocks have wound up down in the valley. Also, there's a temptation when you build a new city down in the valley somewhere and you have all these nice cut blocks, it's easy enough to just grab some of them. So that is called spoilia, and it's one of the things that contributes to the decay of these ancient buildings. That is the white travertine terrace of Hierapolis, where we'll be next week. Colosse is behind us. This is Laodicea. That's Hierapolis. And so you can see why Paul, in his letter to the church at Colosse, he mentions all three of these very closely together. In Colossians chapter 1, verse 7, he mentions Epaphras. He says, you learned the gospel from Epaphras, our dear fellow servant. And then again in Colossians chapter 4, he mentions Epaphras. Epaphras, who is one of you and a servant of Christ Jesus, sends greetings. Epaphras, who was one of you. So we know that he's originally from this area of these three little cities and had spent time in Ephesus studying with Paul. He talks about Epaphras praying for them and working for them. Epaphras is praying hard for you and those at Laodicea and Hierapolis. Give my greetings to the brothers and sisters at Laodicea and to Nympha in the church at her house. After this letter has been read to you, see that it is also read in the church of the Laodiceans, and that you read the letter from Laodicea. So it's kind of an irony of history that Colosse was the older city, about 400 BC, but about 260 BC, Laodicea had been founded by Antiochus II, and very, very quickly became much larger, surpassed Colosse. So in Paul's day, Laodicea was the big city. Colosse was the small little burb out in the country. But Colosse figures more largely in our mind because we have a letter, and the letter to Laodicea was lost. So part of what we're doing here is restoring the significance of the city of Laodicea, since it tends to get overlooked a little bit in New Testament surveys. So there's that beautiful theater, or one of the two theaters of Laodicea, very classic Greek theater. Main street of Laodicea on the day of the Apostle Paul and the day of the Apostle John, very bustling city. I'll take the people out and you get a little bit more of a sense of just a phenomenal main street that was, with shops and fountains and various statues and monuments. It was just a very, very prosperous, wealthy city. They also had a wool industry here. Colosse was wool dyed purple. Laodicea they had a black sheep, so it was a very fine black wool that came out of Laodicea. Also, there was an eye doctor school here in Laodicea that had developed a certain powder for eye ailments. This was a banking center, just a very prosperous little town here. Not a little town, prosperous city. And very different excavation issue also. We've talked about how to go back in time, you go down in the dirt. That's less true here in Laodicea. Because the modern cities were not built on top of it, you don't have to go as far down. And because you're up on a hill, you're not as susceptible to mud and silt and so forth. So they don't go very far down here, and they find just all kinds of stuff. So instead of spending your energy looking for stuff, you're trying to put it back together. You need people who are Lego builders, or Lincoln log builders. And you can see this one they've rebuilt. These are all recently excavated. They're numbered, cataloged, and then we start putting them together. And you can see that process. Massive temple to Zeus, probably. Interesting pillar here. Classical pillar from the classical pagan past with some carving on it. I'll bring you a little closer. Many years after the original creation of the pillar, some Jewish person had carved a menorah. You can see the menorah there, the 7-branch candlestick of Hanukkah, and also a shofar there, or ram's horn, and over here a palm branch, or lulav, all three powerful Jewish symbols. And then some years later, after Christianity had become the dominant religion, somebody came, carved a cross into that, kind of growing out of the menorah. And this is probably the globe. There was a time around 400 or 500 when the Byzantine Christians liked to carve a globe with a cross coming out of it, symbolizing the universal dominion of Jesus. So, very interesting. So, here we are at Laodicea, and they're making very rapid progress, partly because they're very close to the Pamukkala University, so they have a lot of students available, and who wouldn't love to help out here? So you have not only your archaeology students, of course, but your architecture students, and really what you want is geometry students, or people who played with Legos when they were little to piece things back together, because that is what they're doing here. You can see the rubble, and you can see the rebuilding. I don't remember the guide saying specifically, but I think that this is probably the dirt line. So these are more well preserved by the dirt, and then all of this would have been scattered and put back together piece by piece, and figuring out what goes where and then what goes on top. Just they're slowly, well actually by archaeological standards, they're very rapidly rebuilding this ancient city in all its glory. And that's that travertine terrace at Hierapolis, and Lord willing, we will be there next week. So, okay. Okay, again, thanks for joining us. I hope you have a chance to read through Paul's letter to Colosse and to Philemon, and now you have a sense of the setting that those people were living in. And then you could read also Jesus' letter to the church at Laodicea in Revelation chapter 3, where he talks about you think you are wealthy, but actually spiritually you've become poor. So that now you know a lot of the background for that. So, okay, we're going to close down here, and hopefully see you next week. Thanks for joining us.